Dr. Willian. Deixa eu apresentar para vocês, então, o nosso palestrante desta tarde. Ele é assessor do Departamento de Estado Americano e Plano Colombo, distinto professor de Psicologia e diretor do Instituto de Psicologia da Saúde e da Prevenção da Universidade Claremont. Seu trabalho aplicado na prevenção de drogas tem sido apoiado nos últimos 20 anos pelo Instituto Nacional de Abuso de Drogas dos Estados Unidos. Foi fundador, diretor do Centro de Avaliação da Universidade Estadual de Michigan, dirigiu o Laboratório de Pesquisa de Políticas Públicas do Texas e foi chefe do Departamento de Comunicação da Universidade do Arizona. Pessoal, gostaria que vocês recebessem uma salva de palmas ao nosso palestrante, Willian Crano.
This is the kind of introduction my father would be very proud of and my mother would believe. I want to talk to you about persuasion and prevention and drug use using the media. If I can get my clicker to work. Okay. We have a history of lack of success in using media to prevent drug abuse, especially in children. I'll give you an example. From 1998 to 2002, we spent $1.4 billion to administer the National Youth Anti-Drug Media Campaign. Heavily, every medium that you could think of, we used to stop drug use. Despite this, and it was focused on 12 to 18-year-old children. Despite this huge amount of money that we spent, the evaluations of the campaign were forced to conclude basically that more exposure to the campaign resulted in more drug use by children than those who didn't see it. The frequency of exposure was a negative outcome. Here's some data that you might find useful. This was collected over the course of 15 years, from 2000 to 2015, by a national survey involving more than 40 children. This is the data for 8th graders, 14-year-olds, in terms of their drug use, one year after another after another. As you can see, nothing much was happening. We spent billions of dollars to stop drug use during this period of time, and basically we failed. With 10th grade children, more or less the same. With 12th grade children, 18 years old, flat lines. This is what billions and billions of dollars of failure look like. Why is that? Why can't we use the media? In fact, in many European countries now, they've given up using mass media for drug prevention purposes. Probably 15 out of 30 members of the European Consortium of Drug Prevention have cut back on media. Some have stopped entirely. France is not doing anything now using media in prevention. I think this is a catastrophe. And I think it's a catastrophe because it doesn't need to be that way. It doesn't need to be that way because what we're doing is presenting media advertisements that are just terrible. They don't take advantage of any of the persuasive processes that we've learned about over the past 70 years. We can't tolerate that. Does it matter that we haven't succeeded? Of course it does. Look at all the problems that drugs, even as apparently benign as marijuana, can cause. It's not benign, but you'd think that it was because of how the different states, different countries are dealing with this drug, which is by legalizing it. Marijuana used by adolescents is associated with learning deficits, higher levels of aggression, higher likelihood of related injury to self and others, poorer relations with parents, greater risk of sexually transmitted disease, more positive attitudes toward drugs, hence more use, addiction, more children and more adolescents in the United States enter treatment with a primary diagnosis of marijuana dependence than all other illegal drugs combined in our country, more associations with delinquent and drug-using friends, much higher risks of dangerous drug use in adulthood, and interference with normal brain development in youth. Our national academies have just put out a major paper there showing that if you're a youngster and you're using lots of marijuana and very frequently, it will cause functional damage to your developing brain. And your brain doesn't finish developing until it's somewhere in your mid-20s. Which means that if you're in a state in which you can buy marijuana legally for recreational purposes when you're 18 or when you're 21, you have a good chance of hurting yourself if you use the drug too much. What's the reason for that? All that we're talking about is making money. It's not worth it. Come on. I know you can do this. All right. There are three reasons why this is happening, why the media have failed to deliver positive outcomes. The first of them is a failure to understand fundamental features of mass media. We don't understand how mass media works, at least people using them for drug prevention purposes. We don't know what they're designed to do and what they're designed not to do. We fail to understand fundamental features of persuasion. When I'm trying to use the media for prevention, in my mind, prevention equals persuasion. I have to persuade you not to do something. That's what prevention is about. I have to prevent you from doing something you might want to do as a kid. So what do we have to do to induce people to adopt our advice, especially when they don't want to? It's not enough really to inform them, to say this drug will hurt you. That doesn't seem to make much difference to most adolescents, at least if they're on the verge of using a substance. Do we know how to overcome resistance to the information that we want to provide? The answer to that question is yes. We've been studying persuasion for 70 years. And there's a very good backlog, very good buildup of knowledge in that field. And basically we don't know how these two features interact. How do we integrate the reach and immediacy of the media with our understanding of persuasion? That's the nut that we have to crack. That's the ideas that we have to form. And if we don't do that, we're going to be in trouble. So let's think about the media. What do media do? What's the fundamental purposes of media? When you sit down to watch a TV show, what do you do? What do you want? Well, you might want to be entertained. You might want it to engage you. You watch the TV, you're entertained. Okay, that's one function of media. What's another function? It's to instruct you. You might want to learn something, so you watch an educational TV or movie or documentary. You learn something by it. The other function is to persuade you to do something. I might want to persuade you to buy my car or to buy a particular brand of watch or milk or something. All of these are three features. These three features are what the media do. In a substance prevention campaign, using media to deliver a preventive communication, all three of these factors have to be present. You can't skip any of them, or you're going to lose. If any are ignored or poorly realized, poorly implemented, media-based prevention will fail. So it's our job to figure out how to do it right. And I'm not going to tell you that I know how to do it right, but I have a better impression of how to do it than lots of our people already using media for prevention purposes. Here's what we assume when we go into a media campaign. My institute does, we're in California, so it's easiest for us to produce videos and films. Here's how we approach it. The first thing we assume is that our audience is going to resist what we have to say. We assume resistance. We're trying to tell somebody not to do something that they want to do, or that they might be thinking of doing. We assume resistance. And then we design the media to satisfy three crucial functions. One of them is all of our media try to or develop to raise a question in a person's mind. Are you sure that marijuana isn't harmful to you? It's shown that there's this that can cause some severe problems if you overdo it. And the third thing we do is to try and reinforce you in such a way to try and present you with a rationale so that you will accept our interpretation, our statement, rather than stay with what your friends just told you, and your friend may know nothing about anything. To enhance effectiveness, we try to tailor our persuasive message to the particular susceptibilities of our sample. We try to know what makes you believe me, and I will try to make my prevention ads do that for you. How do we integrate these critical media functions? In a very simple way, we've developed a simple algorithm called the EQUIP model. I don't know how that translates into Portuguese, you know? I don't know, okay. EQUIP, okay. The EQUIP algorithm puts together all of the essential features that I want to see in a persuasive prevention communication. It outlines the central features you need to know and suggests a procedure for designing successful media-based prevention. EQUIP stands for 5 different processes that the medium has to do if it's going to succeed. The E stands for engage. I need to attract your attention and maintain it throughout my presentation. If I don't do that, then everything is lost. If you're not listening to me, if you're not watching my videos, I don't have a chance to persuade you about anything, right? So that's the first necessary part. The second is the question. I have to raise a question in your mind. Am I doing the right thing? Am I thinking of doing the right thing if I want to engage in some sort of substance use? The third part of the EQUIP is the U. It means to undermine. It is, I just raised the question in the second phase. In the third phase, what I try to do is to undermine your answers, is to say, well, naturally you're wrong. And by doing that, it leads me to the fourth phase, which is to inform. At this stage, I give you information about what you ought to know, what the science says. And then finally persuade. By that I mean I have to provide you with some kind of an incentive for accepting my ideas rather than the ones that are incorrect and that you may be harboring, that you may be believing. The model assumes resistance. It integrates critical features of persuasion. It assumes the audience is appropriate, that you're appropriately targeting the audience, and it supplies a framework for creating persuasive messages. If you want to create a persuasive message, anti-drug message, I suggest you go through these 5 steps, that your message do all of these. This is an outline for how to create a persuasive, preventive communication. It's not just for drugs, it's for any kind of persuasion. You could use this to sell cars if you wanted to. But I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in stopping kids from using drugs. So how's it work? Let me talk to you. Let me show you an ad that we used many years ago. It was the primary ad in the major anti-drug campaign that we used. Can you bring your, I need you to, there you go.
Okay, last time. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?
Okay. This was the part of a major communication campaign, persuasion campaign, and the people who presented this thought this was the best thing that they'd ever done. And in fact, this probably was 15 years ago that this ad came out. And I still remember it. So by that criterion, you might say, well, the ad succeeded, right? No, it didn't succeed. It didn't persuade anybody not to use drugs. And here's why not. When we look at the EQUIP model, did it engage you? Did it attract your attention? Yeah, I I mean, if you see an egg frying on the TV, you look at it and say, oh wow, that's deep voice, this is your brain on drugs. Okay, fine. So you watch that and you're entertained by it. But did it raise a question in your mind? Did it raise the question, should I be using this drug? It didn't in mine. I didn't think it worked. Did it undermine my belief? Let's say I'm a kid thinking about starting drug use, starting the first marijuana joint that I've ever had. I'm thinking of trying one. Did it raise a question? No. Did it undermine my idea that, boy, this is going to be a lot of fun? No. Did it inform me? Did it tell me how to avoid frying my brain on drugs? No. Did it persuade me? No. We have all sorts of data saying this ad was a complete failure, even though everybody my age at least, everyone remembers it. Sure, you remember it. But there's a difference between memorability and persuasiveness. I remember the ad, I wasn't persuaded by it, I'm still not. This was a creative and memorable ad that satisfied one of the 5 equipped functions. Criteria, engage. And as we might expect, when you do research on that ad and see whether or not it makes a difference to kids, the answer to that question is no. It had no effect whatsoever. And yet it cost a lot of money to put it on the air, to put it by TV time and so forth. So all that money was wasted. It wasn't worth it. So can we do this sort of thing? Do we know how to get this slide to change it? Okay. We have a campaign now that is called the Truth Campaign. No, go back. Okay, there's something that should come up here. Can you use the... Not going to work. Okay, what the Truth Campaign does is a successful anti-smoking ad that was run in our country. That something is supposed to pop here, but it didn't. It has before, but it isn't today. And basically what they use is humor and irony that really appeal to adolescents to say things about prevention that they ordinarily might reject. So for example, they have a poster in a school, and the poster says, "We love smokers." This is an anti-smoking ad. Just a poster that they put up in schools. We love smokers. And it says, we love everybody. We're not against anyone except maybe the cigarette companies who are trying to convince you to smoke cigarettes. They have to do this because they lose 1,200 customers in America every day. And then the line, you know, because they die. Now, if you just came out without being sort of funny or lighthearted about it and said, don't smoke, it kills 1,200 people every day in this country, you would say, yeah, please, come on. But with the script that they used, it was ironic, it was light. They delivered a very strong message without twisting your arm, without beating you over the head with it. And adolescents love this. And the cigarette companies hated it. And there was nothing they could do about it because it happened to be true. There is a song on this that I wanted to show you. It's a singing cowboy in the middle of Times Square in New York. So here's the Times Square, and you see this guy riding up on a horse, and gets off his horse, and there's a campfire going. And he starts singing. I won't sing for you, but I'll tell you the script. And the script says, remember, this is, and the man is holding a voice box to his voice, to his throat. And he's singing, you don't always die from tobacco, sometimes they just cut out a lung. You don't always die from tobacco, sometimes they just snip out your tongue. And you can't sing worth a heck with a big hole in your neck, but you don't always die from tobacco. And it's not funny the way I say it, but if you see the ad, if I could only get it to work, no, it's not coming up. You would say, that's really funny. And yet the message that I've just told you is not funny at all. It's disgusting. It's horrifying. And yet the way that the presentation worked, it actually got you to listen to it. It engaged you. It gave you information. It undermined your normal response, perhaps, to a persuasive advertisement. And then it hit you with the punchline. Very nice idea. So what do we do? Let's go back to the basics to figure this out. Okay. No, forward. Okay, next one. We're going backwards now. This is really not good. Forward. I'm pressing it pretty hard. Now okay, good. We assume that when we try to persuade adolescents about something, they don't always believe what we tell them. Social psychologists call this counter-argumentation. We have to engage people. In their minds, we have a debate going on. I'm telling you one thing, you're a kid, and you're saying, oh no, that can't be right. Okay, this is the argument that we're having. So if this is true, and there's plenty of evidence that it is, we have to overcome counter-argumentation in order to create positive persuasive results, in order to win the battle. There's considerable literature built over 60 years that suggests what to do and how to do it. And this fits with what we know. Given these understandings, here's what we try to do. We try to make counter-argumentation difficult, impossible, or apparently unnecessary. We target or tailor the message to the unique susceptibilities of our audience. And we have a grant now from our National Institute on Drug Abuse to do just this. And we've been successful. And I'll tell you what some of our results are. In our early research, we divided young kids, 12 to 18 years old is what our primary target audience is, between three groups. One group is users. We say, have you ever used this drug? And many of the kids in that age group will say yes. Let's talk about marijuana, for example. Other people will say, no, I've never used it, and I will never use it. Of course, about 10% a year do. But at least initially when we measure them, they say, no, I'm not going to use it. The other group says, well, I don't use it now, but I might. We call them vulnerable non-users. This is different from the usual treatment model, which often divides users into different groups, but never non-users. Our division, the way that we're doing it, is focusing on prevention rather than cure. Frankly, I don't think the media is good at curing things, at curing problems. I think it's good at preventing them. But if you have an addiction to a specific substance, whether it's marijuana or heroin, I don't think you're going to look at an ad on TV and say, oh, okay, I'm going to quit. I don't believe it works that way. But it does work in prevention, and it is considerably easier to prevent a problem from occurring than to do something after it has occurred, using the media. The media is very particular about what it can do. We focus on youth because they are more vulnerable, because they know less, and I feel bad about seeing kids hurt themselves out of ignorance, because they don't know what they're doing. And this is why we focus on them. So what's our approach? We start with focus groups to judge our initial attempts. Many people will go into the field and say, I know what is going to convince kids They create an ad, they show it to a large audience of children, and nothing happens. And nothing happens very often because the kids themselves are not persuaded by the ads. Very often the presentations that are given to them have nothing to do with what they're thinking. We never go into a field like that. We always take our research, our ads that we create, and bring them to small groups of kids, 12 to 18-year-olds, and say, what is this telling you? What do you think? Is this persuading you? Does this make any sense to you? Do you understand what we're doing? And half the time, old guys like me don't know what kids are thinking, don't know how they're responding to our appeals, and consequently it would be a waste of money and time to take that to the larger section. So we revise and we keep doing it until we get what we want, which is small groups of children saying, oh, okay, I know what you're asking, I know what you're saying, yeah, it makes sense to me, etc. At that point, we go to the field with much larger groups of respondents. And that approach has proven very successful for us, and I recommend it for you. We deliver, for example, in one of our early studies, we were worrying about use of inhalants. A school system in California called us and said we were having trouble with our kids. They're using inhalants a lot, and we're afraid that one of them is going to die from this, because this is what happens sometimes if you misuse inhalant substances. So what can we do? What we did was to figure out a study. We designed a study, we designed our communications, and 3 variables that we looked at was, what is the status of the user? We had a lot of kids who were resolute non-users. They said, I don't use those drugs, I never will. We had some kids who were on the fence, who were at risk. We had other kids who were using them at the time. It's amazing, these children would admit to you, say to you, you know anybody who uses these substances? And a lot of kids would say, yeah, I do. Really? Why do you do that? And they'll tell you, oh, and this breaks your heart sometimes. A little kid tells you, he's 6th grade, he's 12 years old, he says, well, I'm not very popular in school, but all those guys over there, you see them? Yeah. They're the most popular kids in my class, and they all use it. So if I use these substances, I'll get to be popular too. You say, oh my God, the logic of that is totally wrong. It doesn't work like that. But it's hard to convince a kid of that. So we have these 3 levels of children. We have the source, and the source is the same woman. In some cases, she's dressed up like a high school student. She's wearing Levi's, a sweater, and she's young looking. She's sitting on a desk in front of a classroom as if she's talking to these kids. In another situation, she's dressed like a medical doctor. She's in hospital scrubs. She has a stethoscope she's wearing, and we shoot her in a doctor's office with all kinds of medical equipment behind her. Luckily, my wife works in medical school, so that was easy to get access to. And then the 3rd variable we manipulated was who was the apparent target of our communication. In one case, the girl, either the doctor or the high schooler, the same person, says to one or another group, students, there's something I want you to learn about. I want to tell you about inhalant substances. Another group gets the same message, except it starts this way. Parents, there's something I want to tell you about inhalant substances. One word difference between what one group heard and what the other group heard. Nothing else. We call this misdirection. Why are we misdirecting our communication? Why are we saying this parent, I want to talk to you parents, but we actually want to persuade the kids? Because what we felt would be the case, again, based on research that's been out there in the literature for 30 years, we thought that it would not generate resistance to a persuasive message that is designed to go to their mothers. Why should I argue about a message you're sending to my mother? What do I care? I'll listen. I might want to know what you're saying, but I'm not going to fight you. That's an ideal circumstance for persuasion, because you're not counter-arguing. And that's precisely what happened. Those children were much more persuaded by the mother ad than the other kids who heard the ad that was directed to them. And when we dug into the responses of those kids to try and find out what was going on, it was because they were not counter-arguing. There was no argumentation going on there. We got this idea from the Arizona smoking campaign, anti-smoking campaign, where a message was delivered to parents, saying, parents, please don't smoke with your children around because secondhand smoke is really not good for your kids. That worked on the parents, that made a difference. But where it really made a difference was on the adolescents who lived in those families. They quit because they didn't want to hurt their young brothers and sisters. It was much more effective on the adolescents than it was on the parents too, whom the ad was directed. We have a campaign, part of a campaign in our national anti-drug campaign that was directed to parents. It was called Parents, the Anti-Drug. And the format of all of those ads were the same. You have a mother talking to the neighbor at their front door, and behind her, you can see the cameras pan behind her, and you see a child sneaking down the stairs to the house. He's going to escape the house and get outside. And the mother catches him. She sees him. She says, oh, no, you don't. You've been using this, you've been using marijuana. It was a marijuana campaign. You've been using marijuana, and I told you you're stuck in the house for the next 30 days. Get back up to your room. You're not going outside to play with your friends. It's a young kid. He's probably 10 years old, 12 years old. When we do the research on the effectiveness of that ad, it works really, really well. And everyone thought, and me too, originally, I thought, the reason this ad works is because we're telling parents about the dangers of this drug. There's more information that I just told you. The dangers of this drug, and they are learning about it, and they're acting like parents ought to act, which is to protect their children from this. What we didn't realize is that the kids were watching this ad too. And they were getting the same information that was clearly delivered to their parents, and they weren't fighting it. Why should they? Why should I fight an ad that you're playing to my mother? I don't I'm interested. And they absorbed the information too. They didn't defend themselves against it, and it had a persuasive effect. Misdirection effects are exceptionally strong. And this is one persuasive method that we've used in probably 10 different studies, and it's worked every single time. I commend you to try it. Okay, I already talked about this, so we'll go to the next slide. Now the question becomes, can parents really make a difference? Can they have an effect on their adolescent children who are maybe inclined to try things that they shouldn't, to take chances that they shouldn't take? Can insights from studies of parents' effects actually be transferred to mass media campaigns? Obviously, I think you can, or else I wouldn't be talking about it. But let me show you what we've done. Can you advance the slide, please? Okay, thank you. I'm going to talk about 5 studies very quickly. Study 1, relation of parental monitoring and marijuana use. Does it matter if your parents watch what you're doing if you're a kid? The answer to that seems obvious, but in fact, a lot of the data, a lot of studies haven't been done to show you that. We took a sample of 1,094 parent-child pairs. They were from Arizona. In Arizona, which is near Tucson in Arizona, is the city of Nogales. Nogales, Arizona, and Nogales, Mexico. That is a major drug entry area for marijuana and methamphetamines in the United States, coming up from Mexico. And it goes up from Mexico through Tucson, through Tempe, Arizona, and then from there it spreads throughout the United States. Along that corridor, there's a high level of marijuana, methamphetamine use in kids. we wondered, is there some relationship between how the parents relate to their children and the likelihood of a child using marijuana or inhalants or methamphetamines? We focus, I'll show you the results for all three of those drugs are the same. I'll show you what we found with inhalant drugs. This is the likelihood of inhalant use by parent, as a function of parental monitoring. Parental monitoring means the answer to three questions. When your child isn't in sight, when you don't see your child, do you know where he is, who he's with, and what he's doing? That is a really nice set of questions and is highly predictive if you ask the kid. If you ask the child, when you're not in front of your parents, when your parents aren't around, do they know where you are, who you're with, what you're doing? If you ask the parents, all of them say, well, yes, of course I know. Parents are all perfect. Kids will give you some different answers, though. Some of them will say, no, my parents don't know anything about where I am. Others will say, yeah, they watch me like crazy, okay? That's parental monitoring. So we cross that variable with how much the child knew about one or the other of these drugs. All three drugs will get the same results on, so it doesn't matter. And what you see in this graph is very interesting, which is if you have a very low level of parental monitoring, it doesn't matter how much the kid knows about the drugs. They're going to be using it at a relatively high rate. As monitoring increases from 1 to 5, usage starts dropping. But it drops fastest among those children who know something about the drug, know of its dangers, know what it can cause, know what it can do to you. If you look at this bottom line, basically what it says is if you have high levels of parental monitoring along with high knowledge about the drugs, what the drug's effects can be, you can drive usage down to just about 0. That's not a bad result. Even with kids who don't know anything. The kids in the black line or the blue line on my screen. Even among kids who don't know anything, parental monitoring drives the usage down, but not nearly so much. That was the function, that was the slide, that was the research that we put out that started in the United States, the Parents the Anti-Drug Campaign. That was the only part of that huge multi-billion-dollar campaign that actually worked. And it worked because it involved parents. We should do that more often. Here's another study we looked at in my group. We looked at a meta-analysis, putting together analysis. This is an analysis that put together analysis. We looked at, for every single study we could find in the published literature, the scientific literature, that had measures of parental monitoring and children's marijuana use. We found 17 studies that involved 35,000 children. We put those studies all together, the results together. This is what we found. A significant relationship between parental monitoring and marijuana use. A significant negative relationship. The more monitoring, the less use. Isn't that interesting? Results indicated also a significant relationship that was stronger in girls than in boys. Why is that? Because girls are watched or monitored more closely in America than boys are. Boys are, go out and play, go do something. Girls are, where are you going, what are you going to do? Who are you doing it with? I would be surprised if that's not true in Brazil. And it's stronger, this result was much stronger when monitoring was defined in terms of parental knowledge. That is, do you really know what's going on with your kids? And how do you know it? And what we found was parental knowledge, rather than just surveillance, rather than just watching. We say, how do you know this information? And what the parents said was, because my kid told me. Well, that's interesting, because that suggests that parental warmth makes a difference. If you're alienated from your parents, you're not going to tell them about what you're about to do. You're not going to admit to them about things that might cause them to take a stick out and hit you with it, right? So if there's strong evidence, okay, there's also evidence that these results are very trustworthy. In order to drive these results to nothing, to no effect, you would need about 7,500 studies that didn't work. Okay, so this isn't a freak finding. This is there. This is for real. Here we're looking at a study of 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. The nationally representative study in the United States, almost 40,000 kids. And what we're looking at is family structure. We noticed that when kids have only one parent, either a father or a mother, they tend to get in trouble much more frequently than if there are two parents there. We had a suspicion that this might have to do with the ability to monitor the children. If I'm a single parent, if I'm in charge of my kid and my wife is not there anymore, she's either left me or died or found somebody who was smarter or more handsome, which wouldn't be very hard, my kid may have more trouble with all sorts of things, with school, with delinquent behavior, with drugs, than not. That's what the literature shows. So we wanted to see if that was true. And in the data, the numbers are jumpy, but it's exactly that. If you have a mother-only family, your kid is going to get into more trouble than a father-only family, who's going to get in more trouble than if you have dual parents. Okay, why is that? That's well known. I mean, that study replicates data that have been out there for a long time and keep coming up. If you have a missing parent, and if you have 0 parents in the family, that is, if you're being watched by an aunt or a grandmother, you're in real trouble. At least in terms of the statistics that we have in my country. It's a problem. Partly because we don't use extended family, we don't have extended families very much in the United States. In some of the Latin American countries you do, and so I'm not sure these data will hold here. So let's see what happens. We decided to build a model to try and figure out why is this happening. And we've got a lot of research going. We think, well, maybe this variable, maybe this variable. We create a statistical model with data from thousands and thousands of people that we have available to us in our national archives, in our archival data. So what do we think? What do we know? Well, we know family breakup is disruptive, often causing severe financial strain. We know from our statistics that family breakup usually costs the women more than it costs men. It's financially more difficult for women than men. We know that Aristotle was correct. He was always correct. He said you can't be two places at once. I'll show you why that's true in a minute, and why we care about that. Why we care about that is because if you're at work, you're not at home monitoring your kid. If you're a single-parent family, you as a parent are working, unless you have a hell of a good lawyer. So what happens then when the kid is by himself? Well, he looks, where's he get his information from about drugs, about things that he might not want to talk to his mother about? He gets it from his friends, who know almost as little as he does, or she does, about the effects of drugs and the potential dangers that they hold. They're not the best sources of normative information. Your best friend might say, oh, everybody I know is using this stuff except you. You want to be the odd man out. And most kids say, no, I do not want. I want to be like all my friends. And the misperception of norms, of normative use in a society, in a group, can cause severe problems for young kids. So we use these are well-accepted possibilities based on evidence. We're not making this stuff up. We're looking at the statistics in our country, maybe not in yours, but you could do it here too. We're looking at trying to link these variables together in a statistical model that might make sense, that we can understand how these variables operate in pushing a kid into drug use. We have data from about 4,200 children. Longitudinal data, so we take the data in the first year and we measure them again in the second year. This is the model that we come up with. It looks weird, but it's kind of simple to understand. First of all, one of our variables is family income. And what you see in terms of these double arrows, family income linking with mother only versus dual parents, this negative relationship says when a woman in the United States is divorced, her income is very seriously negative impacted. Makes a serious dent in the quality of her life. It may be worth it, but it nevertheless, financially, it costs a lot. With fathers, it doesn't make as much difference. The relationship is statistically significant, but it's weak. Okay, those are correlations. They're just relationships, but in this sample, it reaffirms what we think we already knew from the economic data that we have available to us in the country. So what's the difference? What makes a difference? Family income has a positive impact on parental monitoring. The more money you have in the family, the more likely you are to monitor your child more heavily. Why is that? Because one of you may be at home. You're not on the job. If it's a boy or girl, well, all this boy versus girl data show is that girls are watched more closely than boys are. That's pretty common. That doesn't mean much. Father and also father only versus dual parents. Look at the relationship between all four of these variables and parental monitoring. Every one of them is positive. The more income you've got, the more you monitor your kid. If it's a girl, you monitor her more closely. If you're in a father only versus dual parent family, it's a negative relationship. That means dual parents are monitoring their kids more closely than single parent, than families in which the father is the custodial parent. The same with mother only, the bottom one. That relationship also is negative. Mother only versus dual parents. Dual parents watch one. Why is that? Because mother's working. You know, dual parent families, very often you have mothers and fathers both working also. But a lot of times what's happening is the father's working one shift and the mother's working another. There's always somebody home watching the kid. There's never a time when the kid is totally on his own. So what does that mean? Okay, so you got more parental monitoring. Notice that these variables do not affect parental warmth. The parents are equally warm, even though there might be only one in the family, one at home. So it doesn't affect warmth. That's what those dotted lines mean. But it does, all these variables affect monitoring. Well, what does monitoring affect? Well, look, monitoring affects what we call social and what we call interpersonal. Social is our shorthand for a big complex of scales having to do with what the kids' attitudes are toward drugs. Okay? So if you've got strong parental monitoring, that has a negative effect on kids' attitudes toward drugs. In other words, the more you monitor a kid, the less positive he feels about marijuana, for example. That's what this study is about. How about parental warmth? Yeah, all of these variables, even though none of these causal variables affect parental warmth also has an impact on what the kid believes about drugs. What's this other variable down here? Interpersonal. That is a measure of the quality of the child's friends. Does the child's friend smoke marijuana? Is the friend a juvenile delinquent? Has he been in trouble with the law? Does he get in fights at school? Does he get kicked out of school? All of those things. And look, it works the same way. All of these variables, parental monitoring and parental warmth, have negative impacts on the badness of your friends. I could say that better. The more warmth you express toward your child, the less likely is that kid to have friends that you don't want them to have. So, what difference does that make? Well, look at here. This is a year later after we took these first measures. This has to do with time 2, year 2's substance use in those children. Those social and interpersonal variables, attitudes, friends, have a major impact on the kid's initial starting up of marijuana. Do they start up? No. There's significant effects here that says if your parents are monitoring the child closely, if they're warm to you, you're not going to have the wrong attitudes about drugs. You're not going to have friends that will get you into trouble, or at least fewer of them. And that in turn will affect the likelihood of your initiating drug use. It'll have a negative impact on that. The likelihood of your starting, when all of this stuff is understood, is you're not going to be doing this sort of thing. This is a model of children's binge drinking and arrests. If you're not convinced, yes, this study was carried out over 14 years. We got a hold of data that followed children and their parents across the span of 14 years. It's still going on, this study. It's not ours. But we asked if we could have their data, and they said yes, if we paid them a lot of money. So, which we did. Okay, so now what we're looking at is parental control. That's another word for monitoring. It's what they call it. We use their terminology. Parental warmth, which just means you hug your kid, you care about your kid, you're warm to the kid. You don't just sort of say, oh, you know, you got 98% on your test, who got the other 2%? That's not warm. Okay? And the third variable is parent alcohol use. Do your parents drink if you're a kid? When I was a young father and my kids were sitting around the table and I might have a celebratory glass of wine or something, I would sometimes give my kid a little sip and say, here, you know, give this a try. I thought it would demystify the idea of using alcohol. I was wrong. According to this set of findings that we produced and 3 or 4 other major studies that did the same thing, you shouldn't do that. As much as it makes sense, as much as you think this is a reasonable thing to do for your kid, it will desensitize them to drugs. It will not be mysterious anymore. Alcohol will be just something that they don't like. Look at what happens. Parental control, what I just talked about was ease of access. Is it easy for a kid to have a little swig of wine or beer or something? Because their parents say, here, try this, come on, it's New Year's Eve, give it a shot. Well, ease of access is negatively related to parental warmth, but it's positively related to parental alcohol abuse. Okay, so now you know who the parents are who are feeding their kids alcohol. It's people like me. No, it's not people like me. It's people who drink more than they should. Look at these paths. All of these paths are statistically significant, and some of them are very scary. We have measures of parents' usage perceptions. Is it a good thing for me to drink in front of my kids? Is it a good thing for my kid to have a little swig of alcohol on Christmas Day or on New Year's Day, New Year's Eve? Those variables are both related to adolescent use. In adolescent use, if a kid uses alcohol, is related to binge drinking. Binge drinking, in our definition, is for a man, it's 5 drinks within a 2-hour period. With a woman, it's 4, because typically they're not as heavy as we are. So the stuff that we were doing as parents, being nice to our kids, giving them a drink of something on Christmas, was the wrong thing to do. Because that's related to the child using that substance in adolescence. It is significantly related to that. And that is significantly related to the child binge drinking in college. That's what this measure is about. And that variable, binge drinking in college, 15 years from the beginning of this study, is related to the child, now a grown person, having an arrest record. More likely to have been arrested. And that result is not very weak. If you look at this first variable, does the parent use alcohol? What this is saying is the more alcohol the parent uses, the more likely is that kid, or their kid, 14 years later, And remember, they're not starting out as babies. 14 years later means the kid now is maybe 30 years old. And more likely that person will have an arrest record than a person with a parent who doesn't abuse them. So if you get arrested because you're drinking too much, blame it on your father. Okay, so what we're saying then is none of these variables don't matter. They all matter. Things that you would never think about. But if you look at the data, and the data are not from one or two people. These are hundreds and hundreds of respondents, followed over 14 years. And they're telling you something that is very, very hard to say, oh, I don't believe this. Of course you better believe it. Unless you have a very good idea about why these data are all wrong, and I don't know how you could come up with one. What they're saying is you've got to be, as a parent, extremely careful what you do in front of your children, what you introduce them to, and how you respond. Because if you're not, you may get to have a kid who's arrested when he's 30 years old, and you have to deal with that. Luckily, it hasn't happened to me yet, even though I was feeding my kids alcohol on special occasions. Okay? I lucked out. But luck is variable. Luck is chance. You may not be lucky. But be careful. Here's something, just an aside. I just want to put this forward for a minute because it was hypothesized and tested out by a very, very smart man in the 1940s, a genius. He had more brains than anybody I ever met. This is called the two-step flow of communication model. He was worried because in the 40s, when we were using mass media to do all sorts of things, like we were in the middle of a war then. So mass media were being used to maintain morale among the troops, to get the citizen population to give money to the war effort. And things like that, where it was really necessary to use the mass media. They didn't work very well. And he didn't know why, and so he started studying all of this. And what he came up to, what he understood after studying this, genius studying this for 2 solid years, comes up with this idea that the mass media don't really affect the masses directly. They affect people who are the opinion leaders of the mass. In other words, if you listen to everything I say, I'm your opinion leader on a particular topic. If I listen to you on everything you say about something, you're my opinion leader. And what he says is what you need to do if you're using the mass media is figure out who those leaders are and get them to agree with your position, with your persuasive position, because they convince the people in their circle that you ought to listen to this. They transmit their understanding of media message to their followers, and that has massive impact on what their followers believe. So it's not the media itself that affects the masses in a mass media communication. If it is successful, it affects the opinion leaders who interpersonally then affect their followers. Interpersonal communication is much more powerful than mass media communication. I hate to say that because I do mass media, but it is true, and it's the way it works. So their translation affects the followers, their followers, which then affects the success or failure of the communication campaign. This is important for measurement purposes too, because moving from leader to follower takes time. It takes time for the opinion leader to deal with all of this for her followers. And so if I measure the effects of a media campaign immediately, I'm being very premature. Though the answers I get out of that evaluation are going to be unreliable. Better yet, do it a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later. If you really know whether you want to know if a communication campaign, don't do immediate measurement. Do it maybe a month later, because by then it will have been translated. Your efforts, your media efforts will have been translated by the opinion leaders to their followers. And it's that point you can say, did it work or didn't? Before that, don't trust the data. We have produced a number of approaches that tell us that the translation affects followers' responses. Translation from leader to follower, opinion leader to opinion follower. Now we're thinking, well, gee, how do we get to kids? We don't know who they're listening to, except one answer might suggest itself. Kids, despite the fact that they may deny it, listen to their parents. Kids 30 years old listen to their parents. We've got good data on this. You say, well, but we know that when a child gets older, they become much more influenced by their peers. Yes, they do. This says nothing about whether they're being influenced by their parents, right? They may still be being influenced by their parents. It's just you've got another actor on this, in the play that happens to be their kids. So if we're interested in this persuasion via opinion leaders, let's assume the parents are opinion leaders. If I want to, so what our approach these days is, if we want to convince the kids not to use drugs, we use the parents to transmit that information to their kids. We pitch our anti-drug communication campaigns to the parents. We almost ignore the kids. We know the kids are watching. We know they're not defending themselves against what we're saying to their parents. We already knew that from the previous parts of my presentation, which is good. It helps us. But they also listen to what their parents have to say, if we can motivate the parents to talk to their children about this stuff. And a lot of parents that I've run into don't talk to their children about substances because they think their kids know more about them than they do, and they're afraid to look stupid. And I always try to encourage parents. My first inclination is to say, well, why the hell don't you learn something? But I don't ever say that. What I say is, it doesn't matter if you know the name of the latest drug. In LA, you've got a new drug coming out every week. Literally every week. Because the authorities then, when a new drug comes out, they test it out, they say, no, that's dangerous, you can't do it anymore. You can't use it independently of law. And so you get a good chemist, and he changes the chemical formula this much, and now you're legal for another week. You have a new name with the drug, and the kids know this stuff. It's part of being an adolescent. The parents don't. And I tell the parents, it doesn't matter if you know the name of the latest drug. What you have to know is that, and tell your kids, is that these drugs, if they get you high, they're doing something to your brain. So otherwise they wouldn't get you high. They're doing something to your brain. And sometimes when they do that to your brain, whatever it is, it causes damage. And that damage can stay with you for a long time. Maybe forever. That's what you need to know about drugs as a parent. And that's what you need to tell your kids. It doesn't make a bit of difference if you know the name of the latest gyration of drugs. It doesn't matter. Don't let it stop you. So we targeted parents. We produced a number of scientifically robust findings showing that this is a reasonable approach. And if I could get this clicker to work. Funciona. It works. So what do you need to do to mount a successful campaign? Engage your audience. Question existing pro-drug attitudes that your audience might be holding. Undermine that answer. Show why it's wrong. Inform. Give them strong attitudes are based on information, so you got to give information. Give the strongest information you can, maybe scientific evidence. To me, that's strong information. To some kids, it isn't. So find out what they believe, what their sources of credibility are, and persuade them. Incentivize them to adopt your answers. Show why you should be listened to. And why you may be listened to is because you know something, because you're trustworthy, because you care about the kid. All of that works. Don't overpromise, don't overthreaten. Don't say to a kid, if you use that drug, this horrible thing is going to happen to you. And the kid's thinking to himself, gee, my buddy just did it last night, he's fine. You just lost the battle when you do that. You've lost credibility, which is the kiss of death in persuasion. You can't do it. And the worst thing is that then generates resistance to the next time you want to try and persuade your kid about drugs. The more certain they are that they're right, the more difficult it's going to be to move them off that. So don't fail. Your youth campaign involve parents as opinion leaders if possible. If not possible, make it possible. Parents are a very, very strong ally in this campaign. Thank you for your kind attention.